This will be our final video on the scientific revolution. We're going to see how the scientific revolution not only affected medicine and astronomy, but other sciences like chemistry and biology as well. Let's start with chemistry. Chemistry, as we know it today, didn't really exist until the scientific revolution. Modern chemistry began with Robert Boyle, a British scientist who was the first to make a distinction between a chemical element and a chemical compound. He is most famous for Boyle's law, which states that the volume of a gas under compression is inversely proportional to the amount of pressure. Another British chemist, Joseph Priestley, was the first to isolate and identify oxygen. He also discovered other gases, including ammonia and carbon monoxide. He wrote a book on electricity and coined the term rubber. French scientist Antoine Lavoisier conducted several experiments involving combustion. He discovered not only that substances combined with oxygen when they burn, but also showed that water was made up of hydrogen and oxygen. In addition, he identified 23 other elements and invented the nomenclature or naming system for chemical elements. Carolus Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist, a plant scientist, Linnaeus, discovered a system for classification and formal naming of all plants and animals by genus and species, which is still used today. He also conducted research into hybridization, the process by which two distinct species crossbred. Though Linnaeus initially theorized that species remained constant and didn't change, toward the end of his life, he did admit the possibility that a new species could arise through hybridization. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, in his famous Philosophie zoologique work, French biologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck proposed an early theory of evolution. He laid out two laws. The first stated that changes in an animal or plant's environment can cause modifications in behavior, which in turn can lead that animal or plant to either make greater or lesser use of a certain body part or structure. These parts or structures then either enlarge or shrink due to the use, depending on increased use or disuse. Lamarck's second law posited that these changes to body parts and structures subsequently get transmitted to an organism's offspring. Largely discredited during his lifetime, Lamarck was largely praised by Charles Darwin as having been one of the first to recognize changes occurring in the organic world. The modern signs for mathematical operations were created by Francois Vetta in France in 1603 and were adopted as standard during the scientific revolution. In addition, new branches of mathematics arose. René Descartes came up with analytical geometry, and Sir Isaac Newton invented calculus, the study of rates of change. We're going to continue on. The telescope was invented in the Netherlands in the late 16th century until Galileo made improvements to it in the early 1600s. It had not really been widely used as a practical tool for scientific observation until Galileo. Sir Isaac Newton made further refinements in the early 1700s when he invented the reflector telescope, which uses curved mirrors to magnify objects to a much greater degree than a simple glass lens is capable. The microscope. Considerable scholarship exists tracing the origin of the microscope. The first simple microscopes appeared during the Renaissance, but were limited both in power and in range of tasks for which they could be used. Around 1590, Dutch spectacle makers Hans Janssen and his son Zacharias began to construct compound microscopes, which used several lenses and produced a much greater magnification of objects. In the mid 1600s, another Dutchman named Anton van Leeuwenhoek developed new methods for grinding and polishing tiny lenses of great curvature, which gave magnifications up to 270 diameters, the finest known at the time. He used these lenses to build vastly improved microscopes and make several groundbreaking observations. He was the first to see bacteria and life found in a drop of water. He also was the first to see the blood cells. In 1660s, Robert Hooke of the Royal Society of London improved on Leeuwenhoek's microscope and performed a series of weekly demonstrations to show the power of the instrument. In 1665, he wrote Micrographia, a finely illustrated compendium of microscopic observations that also used the word cell as a biological term for the very first time. The book sparked increased public interest in microscopy. Galileo had sketched out a similar design for a pendulum clock in the late 1500s, but it never was built. Huygens' prime innovation was the balance wheel and spring, which allowed clocks of the era to keep time accurate to within 10 minutes a day. Later enhancements in the mid 1700s brought that margin of error down to 10 seconds. Watches and clocks were built in all sorts of shapes and sizes using the pendulum concept, including portable devices that allowed for timing at remote or field locations. The barometer. The barometer was a brainchild of Evangelista Torricelli, an Italian student of Galileo. Torricelli was trying to create a perfect vacuum, and during the course of his experiments, he noticed that atmospheric pressure affected the height to which a fluid would rise in a tube as he was using. The barometer's ability to measure air pressure can be used in weather prediction. High pressure generally predicts moderate weather, while low pressure generally predicts storms. So he invented the first weather machine. The thermometer. Not surprisingly, Galileo had created a rudimentary thermometer. However, the invention of the thermometer is credited to Santorio, an Italian noble. He is also credited for proposing the medical use of the thermometer. Santorio's thermometer was not very accurate because it was an air thermometer, which meant it was unsealed. In 1654, Ferdinand II, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, invented the first sealed thermometer using alcohol as the liquid. In 1714, German-born Dutch instrument maker Gabriel Fahrenheit created a much more accurate thermometer by using mercury instead of alcohol. Fahrenheit also invented the first standard temperature scale, which is used today in the United States. Many other countries use Celsius scale, which was devised by Swedish scientist Anders Celsius in 1742. So that's how Celsius and Fahrenheit were created as temperature scales. Thanks, scientific revolution. Schickard corresponded with Kepler in 1620s and described a design he had for a calculating clock that could perform complex numerical calculations. Schickard's machine could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Later, in the 17th century, German mathematician Gottfried von Leibniz built upon both Schickard's model and one created by French mathematician Blaise Pascal to create a step reckoner that could also do square roots. All these machines were forerunners of the modern day computers. It all began with calculators. The most obvious result of the scientific revolution was the rejection of ancient and medieval systems in science, astronomy, and medicine. After the scientific revolution, many previously accepted theories had been completely disproved or discarded. The methods developed during the scientific revolution would fuel discoveries for centuries to come. Basing science more firmly in empiricism made conclusions more consistent, reproducible, and accurate. It's all about experiments. Can you recreate it? Then it's proven. The scientific revolution also set the stage for the Enlightenment. Like the pioneers of the scientific revolution, Enlightenment thinkers strove to make conclusions based on observation, logic, and reason rather than on faith and tradition. Though the scientific revolution had little immediate impact on society as a whole, its long-term repercussions can still be felt today. Perhaps more important than the specific advances in science, the revolution represented a shift in worldview. It was an intellectual revolution that changed the way that people saw and interpreted the world around them. That's the final video. We have some questions on Google Form for you to answer.